Hello and welcome to not a DoneJS contributors meeting, but a special edition of our stream in which we're going to go over the next things on our community survey. Good to see you guys. Hey, Justin.
How's it going, Chasen?
Hey, it's good. Hey, Kevin.
Hey.
Hey, Matthew.
How's it going?
Hey, Sheriff. It's really good to see you with like a working internet.
Good to see you too.
So,
hey, bro.
Yeah, for sure. So it's so today we're gonna go through stuff that we've been working on since our last survey, and then we're gonna go through the new proposals that are gonna be survey. A quick overview of stuff that is our holdovers from the previous survey. So let me get this started by sharing my screen. So in this forum post, I put a little overview of like stuff that we've been working on. So dev tools for CanJS is almost there. We just need to add docs to the debugging guide. And then tree shaking is also almost there. It's in a Steel 2.0 pre-release right now. So if you npm install Steel at pre or Steel tools at pre, you've got tree shaking. So those are almost done. Just need to get those released. We're still working on a few things. This improved routing to components. That's my jam, and I'm getting close to being done with it, but not quite. For make it easier to configure, we've got can query logic coming in CanJS 5, and I think that we're going to get that out in the next couple of weeks. Easy state management for React. This was a new one in our last survey, and we've started working on a project that's called Ilum right now, so that is in progress. And then release Steel 2.0. This was a surprise one. We had some resources to be able to like spend more energy on this. So Steel 2.0 will have tree shaking and Bower support removed, no automatic main loading, non-promises by default. It's a handful of things. So kind of surprised we picked that one up. We still plan on tackling the routing guide and the testing guide, and then improve the content of the CanJS documentation. That was a proposal from the last survey, and we plan on tackling that after CanJS 5 is out the door. Any comments on that before we move on to the new surveys?
I think there's going to be a DoneJS 3 that will have CanJS 5, Steel 2, and I think we'll have incremental rendering turned on by default.
That'll be pretty slick.
Will be.
Cool. Let me stop sharing my screen. Matthew, do you want to get us started with some Steel proposals?
Yes, I do. I just have to find both of them. I have one open, find the other. We can thank Mark for both these, Mark Stahl. These are some issues that I think have been around for a while in people's brains, but he actually filed an issue about them. So thank you to Mark. The first one's the easiest, I think, to understand. Well, not the easiest, but the easiest to implement, not necessarily the easiest to understand. His proposal, so the proposal is, there's a lot of very popular packages people use all the time, things like Chai and trying to think of others, Bootstrap's another example that you usually have to configure. It just becomes very repetitive when you do this every time you make a new project and you use Chai and you got to map it or whatever it is that you have to do. So proposal. What he wanted is he wanted to like make this automatic, make this so that we don't even have to think about this. These are popular packages; they should just work with Steel. In a lot of cases, the reason why they don't work with Steel is maybe a bug or something that we can actually fix, but sometimes they're not. Things like Bootstrap or any type of jQuery widget actually does need to be configured. So this proposal is to create a new package. Don't have a great name right now. I called it Steel Pre-Configured. I don't know if I like that, but just a package where people can, all it is configuration. We kind of had this before. We had a Steel node built-ins, which is configuration for like built-in node modules. but that got moved into core Steel. But we did have this in the past, so this is just kind of a new thing. Any type of any type of projects that need configuration, just as kind of a dumping ground for that. Additionally, we want to document some of these packages, just better documentation in general about kind of ecosystem packages. Steel QUnit, for example, Steel Socket IO is another. There's Steel Mocha. There's quite a bit of these, and we want to document that. Hey, if you're thinking about using Socket IO, instead of using the Steel pre-configured, just directly use Steel Socket IO because it's got the configuration in there and it's got some added features and stuff. So as part of this, you want to document that on the website better. Perhaps have some type of warning or something inside of Steel pre-configured that if you try to use Steel QUnit, we're like, hey, or excuse me, if you're trying to configure QUnit, say, hey, maybe you want to use Steel QUnit instead. Just kind of maybe a little bit of a guidance on how to do configuration. Talk more about that than I thought I would. That's a good proposal, so thanks to Mark for that. Vote on that if this is something that you encounter a lot. Shall we go on right into number 2, Jason?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Mark did a really good job of explaining this one. So the issue that he's proposed, well, the issue that he's pointing out here is that for less, actually probably change this to less because we're going to focus on less. This is not a universal solution. When using less, a lot of times the way people structure projects is they have a variables.less, which has all their variables in it. But it might also have some other stuff. Actually, probably variables.less is the way to fix this. But a lot of times what people do is they have a less file which has a bunch of variables and maybe it also has some selectors and other type of styling. And they'll import this in different modules. And because the way Steel less and Steel CSS works is that each individual, each less file that you import into JavaScript is generates its own CSS. So you get what you wind up with is some duplicate styling, which is not a huge problem in regards to file size because that should be deduplicated when it goes to the CSS minifier. But it is a problem definitely in development at least. Potentially in production, where we have duplicate styles and they can override each other, and just the way that the CSS works, it can be problematic. So what thing people have been asking for a long time is instead of doing these each individually, just compile them as one big style sheet. And so that's what this does. Is for each what this proposing is, or my proposed solution is that for each bundle. Compile that into one less module. That way, less internally will see that the same files are imported, and it will only apply those styles one time. It doesn't apply them multiple times. So there's some technical hurdles of this. Kind of like knowing what represents each bundle is a little bit challenging. We don't really have a concept of that. So there's some technical hurdles possibly. So the reason I say that is that this might wind up creating some features within Steel, especially Steel has some APIs for kind of introspection. If you ever use trace data, all that kind of stuff is within Steel. So this might warrant some more upgrades to Steel for that kind of thing. But yeah, don't really have the solution necessarily figured out. But if this is something you've encountered and you want us to come up with a solution, if you want us to prioritize that, please vote on this issue. It's a great issue.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew.
You're welcome.
Dustin, would you like to talk about some proposals?
I would love to. All right, getting my proposal ready here. All right, so this first one is relatively simple. We recently made some integrations with CanJS and React that we're working on. And we thought, hey, there's some other new emerging template engines, Hyper HTML and Lit HTML. the idea is, well, we'd make it so that you can use can observe with them as well, and the same kind of and we make it so that the same kind of you can just mutate the state, and your template knows to update. You don't have to worry about calling set state and passing functions around between all of your components. You can just do things the easy way that CanJS allows. But for this, if you'd like us to explore integrations with other template engines. Next one is to make CanStash even more like JavaScript. So I want to solve 3 problems that all kind of were made clear to me at the last DoneJS Chicago, where I'm seeing new users experience CanJS, and that's always great because you see things kind of through the eyes of a child, and you're like, oh wait, why is it so complex or crazy? And you want to fix that. So the 3 things I want to fix are making it a little bit easier to remember how to do loops, eliminating the weird scope lookup behaviors that CanStash, CanStash has its own kind of scope behavior that's very different than JavaScript's. I also want to make it so, and this is also something that happened, is why can you just access full name? Might seem a little confusing when you're looking at a component. So I want to make it so people just do this.full name, and we would document that. That's how that works. And as a side, I want this to be possible to actually be part of CanStash and not have to be a separate project. So let me break it down a little bit more. Each here can be a little bit tricky to use, I think, and to remember. At least I sometimes will swap these because it's like, it's just hard to me to remember the order. It can be a little confusing, and this is just not something, this is only Stash looks and works this way. I think a for loop would be a little bit easier. A for loop like the ones supported now in ES6. That's part 1. Part 2 is we have these weird scope lookup rules. Let's say for some reason you had a loop within a loop. And so I'm looping through users, and I'm looping through each user's to-dos. If I wanted to call an isOwner on the application view model and pass it the user here, I think you have to do it like this. Now, maybe those no context, it is possible to look up user. Kevin, you can confirm if I'm wrong about that. But you have to remember to go up these 2 levels to get to the application view model, and you might have to remember to go up a level to get the actual user. That's confusing, right? People aren't used to that. Gross. So what I'd like to do is make it so that all of these variables can be immediately accessible, and the view model can be accessible as well if you're not inside of a helper that changed the scope in the way that the old helpers, like each helpers, did. So this would still be the view model as long as you're inside of a helper that doesn't actually change the scope in the way that we used to change the scope. Adding context, instead these would just kind of add closure scopes, which would be a different thing. So this also then gets me to the reason why people were wondering at the last DoneJS contributors meeting why you write this.profiles to get profiles here, but why don't you write this.current profile, or maybe like view model current profile or something. So I'd also like to change it so that it's either going to be view model current profile. My preference is this.current profile, so it looks very similar to the view model that's going on in here. And this would just make more sense in general with like Stash used as a general purpose renderer, not necessarily connect to the component. This is what I was referring to the data that was passed in. So essentially, vote for this if you like the idea of making Stash a little bit easier to use. Scope lookups work just like how they work in JavaScript. Some other things I thought about adding would also be like, so you can declare variables. So here's a metadata that you could then use in the remainder of your template. Some technical considerations. We could create this as a separate project, even though I don't think it actually has to be. I think it could be CanStash and just a new kind of abilities inside CanStash. I thought there was like one more point that I had in here, which was, so there's just discussion on like, hey, well, yeah, if we want to make things more like JavaScript, sure, we should just go, why don't we just finally build the CanJSX? But the CanJSX is a much bigger project, would take a lot more effort to get there. This kind of stuff we could make, we could benefit users much more quickly with, where JSX is a much bigger thing and would require, a lot of breaking changes for people to be able to use it. You have to rewrite your whole template layer. So vote for that if you want to see CanJS a little bit, Stash a little bit easier to understand. Oh, that was the last one for me. Right?
Thank you, Justin. Good next.
Yeah, sorry, you kind of cut out. I assume you asked me.
I was asking you. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. It might be my internet. Anyway, so my proposal, which was originally Justin's proposal, is to make it possible to use the core of CanJS with a package that's smaller than 50 kilobytes. So basically what this would include is can component, can stash, and then can define map and define list. Currently, if you use those things, it's somewhere between 100 kilobytes and 200 kilobytes, depending on how you build this thing and package it and what you're using to measure. But we should figure
95 kilobytes.
Okay, but yeah, but if you use Steele's optimized build, it's like 200. So anyway, we should figure out the way that we want to measure it and make it less than 50 kilobytes. That's what this proposal is for. So there's some details here about how we would go about doing this. Some of these things would have really no effect on the APIs, things like removing redundant code. So as we've been extracting out modules into separate modules, we have some things that are like completely redundant, like this CanView Live Live patcher is now, there's another package, CanDiff patcher, and some of them are wrappers around other modules that really don't do anything. Like we still have CanUtil is promise, and it's just a wrapper around can reflect that is promise. Another thing that we would do is do a better job of removing code that should only exist in development. So we've got canlog dev messages that's only used in development mode, but there's still some code that gets left around in production. Can reflect dependencies, things that are used for like the dependency graphs. That's all development only code that we should remove. Also, we'd have to make some things optional, move some stuff out into plugins so that we you don't get them by default. Things like join URI helper, which includes this can parse URI package. There's some other helpers or some other pieces of our helper code that we could make optional. Another thing would be making the events object on components a plugin so that we could get rid of can control and the wrapper around can control that can component has. The value in can define, the new resolver observable, we can make that its own plugin. And then we can make a plugin for IE11 support. Since we don't actually support IE11 fully right now, we could do things like getting rid of can symbol and just use symbols directly because they're supported in all the browsers except IE11. And then there's some other stuff in here that we could make optional. And then some other things, we could get rid of a couple of modules if we just use symbols directly instead of using the can symbol kind of polyfill, can view model, can DOM data state. And then the last thing is we could optimize a lot of our code for size. There's things that are pretty big that we could slim down. For a long time, we've wanted to replace CanView parser with the new can parse module that Justin created that would give us some savings. There's some clone node code in CanV target that we could get rid of that I think Matthew said was probably just around for IE8 or something like that. There's some things that we could do better to optimize our code for size. And then the last thing we would want to do is create a test that makes sure, or create some sort of way that we can confirm that we're staying under this new 50 kilobyte quota. So we'd have to create some kind of test suite or some way of verifying that once we get under this threshold, we don't immediately make everything bigger again. So we want to confirm that we, stay there once we get there. So vote for this if you want to be able to use CanJS with a smaller package.
Sweet, thanks, Kevin. I'm going to go next, and I'm going to intentionally this time not share my screen yet. All right. First one I want to go over is automate publishing new package versions and release notes. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of problems. So as a CanJS user, if you're watching this, or here, if you're a contributor, you've probably run into any one of these issues. You've maybe gone to the releases tab of a project in GitHub and not found the release notes for the most recent version. Or maybe you haven't written the release notes and I've bugged you about doing that. Or you use the main can package and you want to get the latest bug fixes that were released for can stash or can component or whatever, but the main can package hasn't with those like child dependencies yet. Or if you use the split up packages like can component or can stash, then you upgrade to the newest and latest and greatest, but then you find that some warning messages reference some docs that haven't been published to canjs.com because those packages haven't made it into the main can package yet, so the website isn't up to date. Or you've started to contribute and you're not sure if there's a particular way you should format your commit messages, or you are releasing a new version of a package and you're not 100% sure if you should be running npm run release and then one of those things, or if it's a new package that is set up with the Toby core OS npm publishing for automatic publishing via Travis. Not sure how to release. Or you're a contributor and you need to get access to an npm module that was created by someone else and you don't have access and you have to bug someone on Gitter or Slack. There's a ton of issues with how we currently deal with releases, and I think that as maintainers here, we would publish new versions of the main can module more frequently if there were less barriers to doing so. Because right now we have to make sure that all of the child packages have their release notes before we make a release of the main package, and then we still do a lot of manual trimming of those release notes so that they are usable. And this is only going to get worse with CanJS 5, where we're going to recommend that people start off by using the main can package. So if our release process is slower, that we're not updating it frequently, then that's not going to be helpful to anyone. So I think most of this can be fixed by using something called semantic release. It's not a complete fix for all of our problems, but I think it can get us most of the way there. So basically the buy-in is that we would ask that everyone format their commit messages in a particular way. And then semantic release and Travis can do their magic when things get merged in. So basically the way it works is when a new commit gets merged into master, then semantic release will look at the commits that are new since the latest release. So it'll figure out whether it should be a patch, minor, or major update. It would after the Travis build runs, it would publish the new release to npm, generate the release notes, and create the version git tag. So I think I'm running over on time, so I'm going to cut myself short here and say basically our process would be similar to what it is now, except things would be done, like releases would be done automatically for us, and then we depend on Greenkeeper to open up PRs in the main can repo, which we could just merge and have the main can package automatically released with bug fixes and other changes. So I'm going to cut myself off there. There's more information in the proposal. Vote for this if you've ever felt the pain of any of the problems that I mentioned. Cool. Let me go to second proposal. Improve compatibility with Webpack. So in our last survey, we had this issue: make CanJS compatible with how Webpack strips out dev code. Brief reminder of what that issue was. In a lot of CanJS code, we use still remove start and still remove end to have debug code removed in a production build. And this proposal is for using the more common process env node env check to wrap our debug code in this check so that it gets removed in production. And Steel actually has support for this today with the envify option, which is going to be on by default in Steel.js 2. So that's one way that we can improve compatibility with Webpack, because it has support for that process env check. Another thing that we can do is improve how stash templates are loaded. So right now, our official setting up CanJS and Webpack guide shows using the raw loader to import stash templates. There's actually a CanStash loader package that already exists, and we could contribute to that with like official 4.x or 4.0 support, and then help maintain it in the future. Or we could create our own package. Either way. And then we can show that in our docs in our example, like Webpack and CanJS repo. We might be able to even submit a PR to the Webpack docs to have it listed on their page too. And then the last thing is that sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we have the wrong main in a package.json, or we use some Steel specific syntax in our code that makes the code not be able to be loaded by Webpack, but work just fine in Steel. So my proposal here is that we just add tests in the main CanJS test suite that loads all of the modules. So specifically, this doesn't mean that we would run all of our tests with a Webpack built version of the code. We wouldn't be adding those tests to all of the hundreds of individual repos. This is just to put tests in the main can repo so that we can more quickly find out when any of the packages are not going to be able to be loaded by Webpack. And so that's it. So vote for this. If you use Webpack, you've almost definitely run into any of these hurdles. So vote for this if you're interested in more compatibility with Webpack. Cool. I think that's it for me. Justin, Justin.
I would love to. So, CanJS getting started video. I want to make a new video to replace the old one. I haven't done kind of an overview CanJS video since CanJS 1.1. It's far overdue. I think it'll solve two problems for people. One, if you want to give a video to people explaining, it's kind of in a 45-minute, almost a high level, everything you need to know why to use CanJS and how to use it. That's what this video would target. So I think it's very helpful for training. I remember when I had the CanJS 1.1 video, when I would do meetups and things like that, I'd be like, just make sure you watch this before you come to the meetup, because it'll explain everything. Or when I did a full, like when I was training people in CanJS, I would just watch the video before I even come, and that would really be helpful because it would give people, I can articulate things well in person, but never as well as you can in the video. So I kind of outlined some of the things that it would talk about. It'd mostly be kind of a combination of a rough overview of the points made in the homepage, followed by the technology overview guide in CanJS.com. So if you'd like to see a video that you can easily share, vote for this. And just I think it would help CanJS's popularity. The old video has 30,000 views, which is pretty, most popular video I've made, I think. Next proposal, add type checking. So this is also, I probably should have included also make it for not only can define, but for can observe. I want to make explicit type checking for can define. So there's a problem right now that people, I'm sure, have faced where you say, you create a type and you say, hey, age is a number. And that's nice if it gets a string, it converts that to the number 3. But if you give it something like a string that is not at all a number, you get not a number and you get no errors, no warnings. So alongside what I'd like to make a change is that there would be a new type check behavior that you could specify a type. And what this would do, it would throw, anytime it was set to something that's not a number, you would get an error. Now, this might sound scary, but with stash converters, it's relatively easy to take a value and convert it to a number and things like that to set those kind of inputs up. So it's not, and it's better in some ways. You're like controlling the flow of data at every part, and your view models can really be pure and make sure that they work with as expected. So there's a few other alternative APIs. Oh, I forgot to mention. So there'd be a type check, and the old type behavior would now be called type convert. So to distinguish between type checking and type conversion, there's a few alternative APIs I listed for how to switch between strict or type converter or type checking. If we accept this, we'll do a whole round of asking people their opinion and try to figure out one that makes the most sense. And yeah, I mentioned about the can observe. It'd be nice to create a decorator for can observe that does the same kind of type checking. Create an animation guide. Now, this is an oldie but a goodie, but I want to make it obvious how to do animations in CanJS. Vue actually has a really nice guide for this, and I'm resubmitting this proposal with some new elements pretty much directly stolen from Vue. Specifically, Vue has this idea where you can decorate your, well, they do it a little bit differently than I'm proposing. They do it with this transition element. I instead would just have some kind of transition attribute that you can set on an element. And what this would do is add, as this LI element is being inserted and removed from the page, it would add to that LI element, given the name here, various class names. And it would detect as the animations are running due to those class names, or the CSS transitions are running due to those class names. It would essentially manage as the element's coming in, and then prevent it from being removed right away until all of the animations have completed. So the names and things like this are pretty much identical to, and I actually just copied Vue's documentation for this. The idea is you give it your name here. It's going to add all of these classes as elements are added and removed. And then to set up the animation, you really just have to create those classes, right? And again, Vue's looks like this, right? To run the animations. So we would provide some plugin that did this automatically, but then also the rest of the guide would still take an effect where you had to go low level to actually be able to do JavaScript transition or JavaScript animations or crazy things with JavaScript as elements are removed or added, or you want to do when like the state changes from one thing to another, you want to shake your alert widget or something like that. I would build a guide, or we would build a guide to do all of that. So vote for this if you want animations easier. I think that was it.
Sweet. Yeah. Thanks, Justin. So those are all of the new proposals or new-ish proposals. Shall we run through the ones that are from the last survey? Matthew, do you want to get us started?
Yes, I do. Trying to find the list. Sorry, I get distracted by other things. Share this. So SSR tips and tricks is the first. There we go. All right, so server-side rendering is like one of the best features we have of DoneJS, but it's a little bit hard to debug, just because debugging servers is often pretty hard to debug for starters. There's also some things that are specific about DoneJS that has kind of specific solutions to it. So there's we have all these features that we've added, like zone timeouts and zone debugging. But there's not like a definitive guide about how to use these kinds of things. And then when you do find a problem, like for example, a lot of times if you have a problem, well, one category of problem is that that you do server-side rendering, but it takes a long time to load. And that happens when it times out. And you want to figure out, well, why is it taking so long? So part of this tips and tricks would be, kind of how to debug that, how to adjust the timeout, how to look at the debug log. And the other part of it is once you do find it, well, what do you do about it? So there's like zone.ignore, which gives you a way to ignore a function and prevent it from running within a zone. There's a lot of possibilities here. You can specify a status code as inside of your app. So if your app has a route, but you want to check, for example, you want to check the API to see if, let's say that you're looking up a product and that product doesn't exist in the database because you do an API request and it comes back empty. Well, you could make the SAS code be 404 for that. But again, this is one of those things where it's a nice feature, but maybe it's not explained or documented very well, and that's what this guide is going to be, is to explain different tips and tricks on how to use SSR more effectively. So that is that one. Jason.
Sweet. Thanks, Matthew. Next. All right, improve CanJS.com's usability. So a couple months ago, I conducted a user study in which I identified a bunch of issues with both our website and with our SEO. So Matthew, let me mute you, sorry. So for example, there's some things that we can do to improve the homepage, our tech overview page, that would make it easier for new users. If you've ever had an argument with someone about why you use CanJS and not React or something else, then this hidden comparison to other frameworks page would be really helpful, but we need to finish it and actually put it in the site. And there are some bugs with the website that we'd want to fix too that would just kind of overall improve the site's usability. In addition to that, if you've ever been frustrated by searching for like King component and getting the V2 docs first or something like that, there are things that we want to do to improve our SEO. So that includes like having better page titles, improving the site links that show up when I'm just going to go to the page. When you search for like CanJS on Google, that these go to all like the latest site links and a bunch of other issues. So this is both for existing users, people who are watching this. This is going to improve CanJS.com's usability for you and also make it easier for new users to get started. And that's it for that one.
So my next proposal is for rapid prototyping with scaffolding. This is otherwise known as CanCrud. And I don't want you to vote for this. I don't want anybody to vote for this. Because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this in my spare time because nobody votes for it, just to show everybody how awesome it is. And when I do this and it transforms how fast you can build applications, because you can just like, oh, I've got this idea and I want to create this widget, or like I want to be able to manipulate the data on my service layer without any problems, and I need a UI for it, and it just makes one for you, you're going to feel really sad you didn't vote for it. And then when I say you should vote for something next time, you'll vote for it, because I'm going to prove you wrong. So don't vote for rapid prototyping with scaffolding, because it's going to make you sad that you didn't vote for it already when it lands. My next one is a data guide. So now that I've pretty much finished the new CanQuery logic, this would be a guide on how to deal with all the various situations and different data sources, and how to configure it and do all of everything that you would really need to be able to do with CanJS's data layer. Fortunately, now a lot of this stuff is all documented inside a lot of different places inside CanJS's documentation. It's just not all coalesced into one big massive guide to read through. So that would be my job here, or our job here. And then the final one is another one that I think would be nice. And you can feel free to vote for this one. This is essentially another kind of idea we can take from Vue, which allows you to have event modifiers. I think it would be nice to not have to call, prevent default all the time. Instead, you could just do, did I actually not show it? Like on click stop or something like that to call prevent default or stop propagation, to make it so that we have these little utility helpers on our event bindings to remove some of that boilerplate that you see all the time. And Vue has like a million of them, and they're pretty nice. So that's it for me.
Sweet, thank you. Kevin, you want to finish this off?
Sure. All right, so this first one we've talked about a few times, so I'll go through it pretty quickly. This is a proposal to add documentation for customizing the DoneJS generator templates. So to remind everyone what this means, DoneJS has some templates that are at some point get stored in this .donejs/templates folder. It's not really easy to customize these right now. They don't really get put there at a time when it would make it easy for you to go in and modify them. And then also, it's not documented at all. So there's no documentation about where these are and how to update them and what will happen. So that's this proposal. We had some kind of command that puts these in the right place for you, and we document how to modify them. Cool. The next proposal is to make it possible to support IE11. So I think we talked about this in the last survey meeting. So this proposal is basically to allow people to polyfill things that aren't supported in IE11 in a way that doesn't affect packages other than CanJS. So that's what this is. We would create packages for any globals that need to be polyfilled, and we would provide some documentation on how to replace the polyfills or how to replace the modules with the polyfills without affecting the actual global environment. So yeah, that is those proposals. Vote for this if you want to support IE11.
Sweet, thank you. That is the end of all of the proposals that'll be on the survey that goes out later today. I know, do you guys want to talk about any of the proposals, or?
I think it'd be interesting to ask everybody what, if they had a vote for one, what it would be. One of the advantages of being on the core OS team is that we should have a little bully pulpit. We should have a little bit of extra influence. So if there was one, what would you vote for? What's your top pick?
I think I'd definitely vote for CanCrud, just out of spite, mostly. just because you told me not to.
Yeah, should we take that off the survey now that you've said, like, do not vote for this? I'm going to do it regardless. I'm going to do it in spite. I'm going to hit code.
Yeah, I don't want your spite votes.
No, I think the eyebrows. I think you. I'm really confused. In seriousness, though, I want to take a deeper look at the make Stash more like JavaScript proposal. I obviously like that idea. I think the scopes are confusing for people, but I want to take a look at the details in the proposal to see, well, what kind of breaking changes we'd have to have, if any, and figure out, how that would actually work. But I think that one is interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I'm on board for like the first two things. Let me open up the proposal again. The for change and what was the other thing? And then fixing the weird scope, what's under weird scope lookup rules. Like I'm on board for. But then as soon as you get into changing what this means and the implications
but it doesn't change it. It would work. It would just work the way it always has if you do the scope lookup right.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like, yeah, the thing I like least about like changing scope lookup rules is because like going from project to project, you can't look at a template and understand how it is going to behave, which I know is the same case between CanJS 3 and CanJS 4 because of how the scope walking was removed. But like changing what this is just seems like a bigger, more confusing change to me. So,
well, 2 points. One, we're not changing how this works. It would work the exact same way it has. And 2, when did this turn into like pooping on Justin's stash changes instead of us being positive and saying what our favorite would be?
I'm sorry. I wanted to more. I wanted to more deeply discuss that one because Kevin.
Let's discuss that. Let's be positive right now and say like, what would your number one vote be for? If you had to pick one.
Jason's got nothing. That's good.
I don't know yet. I don't know what I'm going to vote for. I'm clearly going to vote for the 2 new ones that I talked about because I think the release stuff is going to be I feel like it's going to be a huge problem when we have CanJS 5 and people are starting to use the main CAN package and we're not updating it as frequently, or we're spending so much time with updates. I feel like, yeah, I don't know if that's my top pick, but that's one that I feel like we have to do sooner rather than later to keep our sanity with CanJS 5.
I really like the reducing the size of core, just for the fact to have like a test set up so that we know, we just always have the assurance what the max size is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. And you guys were talking about what the actual size is. It looked like you guys were running some numbers and maybe 100 to 200K was wrong.
It's definitely less than 95K. And maybe if you gzip everything's like Matthew's saying like 65.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to gloss over that as much as I did in the proposal. There's lots of different ways to build it, and there's lots of ways to measure. So yeah, that was the very first part of the proposal, is to figure out the correct way to measure this number, and then make sure we get it under 50K.
Well, how you measure it might be impossible if we include like if it's non-minified, non-gzipped, like you're never going to get it there. It's impossible. So I think we have to do minified gzip and ideally production code or all development code removed.
Yep.
Let's base it off broadly size.
Sheriff, what do you think? What would be your top choice?
My top choice is to make CanJS core build less than 50 kilobytes. So my first choice, because lately I was seeing website that I built and I discovered this. I just wrapped some jQuery plugins, so I ended up with more than 750 kilo.
Minified gzipped?
No, it's not gzipped, but it's minified, yes. And I work with Browserify in this project, not Steel.js. So maybe I will test it with the Steel.js, and I will see what it. Maybe I did something wrong there also.
So gzipping can often even minify code more than minification can. So gzipping, if you can add gzipping, always add that, because that'll really if you go to 700, it might get it down to like 350 or even more sometimes.
Yeah, but there's both. For my case, there's an issue for this because it's a shared hosting.
Yeah.
And the server, the web server is Apache, and the deflate module is disabled. So I'm struggling with it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Kevin,
Yes.
are you the only person who didn't, besides me, who didn't?
Oh, I mean, I thought I said make Stash more like JavaScript, but I kind of hedged it. So yeah.
Mine would be the video, actually. I think of all the things that we could probably do to help ourselves pick up adoption, I think a nice, concise, relatively concise video that can just kind of get people to, as quick as possible, know what CanJS is about and how to use it. I think that would have a huge impact. Cool. Do we want to discuss the ins and outs more of the make CanJS or make CanStash more like JavaScript?
Yeah, I think it would be good to discuss either that or what we were discussing earlier this week about IE 11.
Okay. Well, sure. Let's start with the IE 11 one then, because it might be. I think more passionate about it.
Yeah, I think it was just when we were talking about what proposals were going to go into the survey, and we were talking about the IE 11 things, or like supporting IE 11. I was strongly advocating that we would eventually need to do what's in the IE 11 proposal. Because I think people are going to need to support IE 11 for a good amount of time. And I think it's a non-starter for people who are looking at CanJS for a project. And then if they have a hard requirement that they need to support IE 11, then they're not going to choose CanJS for a project if it doesn't have support for it. And by support, I don't even mean that we write all of our code so that it runs without transpilation in IE 11. I mean, just that we have a supported path for here's how you can get your code working in IE 11. And that contrasted with, I think, your thoughts, Justin, on if it was necessary and if we would do it if it wasn't voted on and stuff like that.
Well, my feelings are mostly that we, and unless we're going to commit resources, I feel like there's a certain threshold where we need to a kind of a point of no return for us, which is like, if we're not going to commit resources in the next 6 months or something like that, then we're going to move. We have to move on at some point. So if it doesn't get voted for, or there's not a Bitovi project, or there's not someone who's going to essentially hey, Bitovi, we'd like to hire you to make it support IE 11. And the community isn't, I think there's a small group of people who really, really want it. And those people are obviously really important to us, but it's not as important as everybody. And we have limited resources. And if we're never going to be able to apply resources to it, we have to have a cutoff at some point. So my feeling was we'll keep it on the survey for a few more cycles. And at some point, if it doesn't get picked up, like we're going to just say, hey, now everything is fair game. Edge plus. And as long as it supports that, you can use that. You can write code that way. So that's my feelings on it. I want it if we had the resources, like we'd put someone on it, but we would need someone to like actually make it happen, or people to vote for it. So that kind of makes us do it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I guess that's the discussion.
So the other one we want to discuss is make CanStash more like JavaScript. I think the point of contention here is really going to be like, can we make this backwards compatible? And I'll get into the technical weeds of why I think that is true. You can. So the idea here is that like this you can already do in a normal JavaScript app, like a normal stash. You can already do this dot. Like someone could already write this dot current profile dot image, but we don't have them do that because, and we don't often show this. In some ways, almost dot is better because when people see this, the keyword this, they think of it as like JavaScript's this, and it can become confusing. Because it works, how helpers work and things like that is more like JavaScript's width than actual JavaScript scope. And I would say it works just differently than Stash works. Like, I don't know any, I mean, there's other template engines that work the same way, but I don't know any languages that work this way, that work like how Stash's scope walking works. Where the this suddenly becomes like what you're looping through or something like that. I've never, maybe those exist. I've never used one or haven't used one long enough where I forgot it. So I think that's really worth trying to minimize that old way of it working. And if you think about it, only helpers actually change, like helpers and I guess like leaking components and things like that change what we call the context. Now, what we can have is the Stash's scope become comprised of contexts and closures. And the variable lookup rules, we would add new rules for when you find closures, is essentially what I'm saying. So because there's only one context here, well, this will always look up the first it'll always find the first context, which would mean going all the way up to find, the context this was rendered with. But other variables would find the first closure, and then if it wasn't found in a closure, would use the context. So if someone's familiar with how CanView scope works, it's basically the same scope walking that we've done. It's just we're kind of bringing back the scope walking in 3.0, but it's only going to do that in closure scopes, is how it would work.
This for helper being a closure scope, or like creating a closure
this
scope.
Creates a closure scope. Yeah, these create closure scopes.
Yeah.
So like that would add user to the closure scope or whatever, and then there's like a let helper or var helper or something that you're proposing that would also
those could do that too. Yeah.
And you would just have your current scope would have a closure scope, and that would add these variables to it. Or is it like hierarchical? Like,
yeah, you would have just like there's like essentially contexts. Context would point, like we've kind of like the no context. Like on the meta, there would be some kind of additional information. Is this a closure? Is this a normal context?
oh,
Closure, you would look into it for variables. If it's context, you would kind of skip it.
Okay. So it wouldn't, okay. I was thinking it would work, the closure would work more like scope.vars or something where it's a whole separate thing that's outside of the.
No, these basically what I'm saying is like CanView scope would essentially understand a different form of context. There'd be kind of two different types of context. Like there'd be kind of two different things to look up values in on its chain. There would be either closure context or context. You could give it.
Yeah.
And then with this, we would probably deprecate each, and then would we deprecate with and say use the like variable assignment?
Yeah.
And so basically deprecate all of the things that would previously change what this is, and then this always refers to the root scope or the view model. Yeah.
Yeah. And we could even detect like if people are creating their own helpers that do change the context, we could provide warnings and things like that. Like, hey, maybe instead of doing that, you could add a closure scope yourself if you wanted to. Right now, once you do that, this isn't going to work inside, but maybe they wanted it to have variable names anyways, and they're just like trying to introduce new variable names inside of here, just the way that this is trying to introduce new variable names. Or they could keep with the context, and it's just like, maybe at some point, then we're like, okay, well, those old things are gone. But I don't think that, I don't know. I think that we could keep them around for a long time. That's what I think. Somewhere here, like probably like CanJS 7 or something, where I'd even start considering like actually removing that. But because these things have been around forever since 2.0, and we want people to be able to upgrade without having to rewrite this stuff, I think we'd keep them or as like a plugin. Like, that's probably the way to do it, is eventually for and with become plugins. I don't know if we can plug in CanView scope so that contexts just don't even exist anymore. We might have to keep that in kind of forever, but we could at least we could probably get these helpers out eventually. So bring it in as a plugin.
The each and with helpers.
Each and with helpers.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what people are like, why people build, or what are the most common cases for people making helpers that change the context, and if variable assignment solves this issues for them.
So I recently showed like a few people at Bitovi, like higher order components are a big thing in higher order components are a big thing in like the React world. And I was like, well, you could higher order components or whatever. All they do is provide data, right? They just kind of provide data so that like, in React, I'm going to get the syntax totally wrong, but the idea is like you have a foo, and then you can do something like props render or something, and this gives you a function that can take some values, and then this is going to return some other stuff, some div with a showing a something like this. You do something like that, right? So like foo, all it's doing is trying to provide you other data. Like this could go like get, this is like kind of like the tag stuff in Can Connect. Like could be like get items, and then here's your items, and then you can use items you can loop through and then provide how they should be displayed. Right? That's now CanJS. You could always do this. You could always create a helper like get items, and then here you would have access to each item. You could even write inside of here like each, a lot depending on how they expose it. Sometimes it was each this, but more often they would actually put it as like items. They would call their would what is it? Options. Do something like this. And you would say like items, is this array of items here? And then that's typically how they would do it, because everybody thought it would, you know, even at least I would do it that way, because I always thought it was just like weird to do this. Like, oh, what? That's odd to start looping through each bit. So I would do it like items. I would expose it as items. Now, if they did that, well, I mean, if we wanted to eventually make it a breaking change, this wouldn't actually break if they were doing this. It would only break if they were using this inside of here and they want to do this at items or something like that. If we could, I mean, I'm saying in the future, we could even just make it so like, if you just did this, this creates a closure scope anyways. But we don't have to do that. You know, maybe new closure, no scope dot closure, how you would probably do it. You know, if you wanted to just kind of inject variables so that you could then just do this. These variables would just kind of like come out of Bean, but this inside here would still be your view model. I don't know if that adds clarity to like the reasons why people would do it, and you know how closure scopes would get kind of mixed into all of this.
I think after talking through specifically, like I don't know why it clicked for me more in talking about how the like for would be creating these closure scopes that that don't change context, and then we would deprecate each and with. For some reason, that made it click more for me. That this wouldn't be, we wouldn't be changing what this is. It just would. It just isn't the same as what the each and with were doing, which is kind of gross when you think about it. Like if you think about just removing the ability to change the context, then it seems more natural that the like for in your proposal is how things should work. That makes sense.
Yes, that you can only introduce new variables. It cannot introduce introduce like a context.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's like using an arrow function instead of a regular function. Not changing to this. Anyway.
Well, this is like using a regular function in some ways. It does not have. Now the one, I mean, this would be like, this would be kind of technically a let inside here. It would not be a var for hopefully obvious reasons, because it's going to have, it's only going to be, to do is going to only exist as a variable inside of here, which has, you know, positives and negatives. Sometimes you want to know what your last to do is. I mean, that can be like a sneaky way of, if you have to do something with the last to do, you can loop through it like this and then get it. But I don't care. I don't think that's worth it. And I don't want to initially support like a difference between var and let. I think it's okay not to have. I think it's okay to by default have block level scope, essentially. Cool. All right. I think we've talked enough today. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. If you've made it this far watching us, yeah, props to you. Thanks for watching. I'll have the survey out within the next, I don't know, hour or two. I got to finish putting it together, and then I'll send it out to everyone. And we'll be back with the survey results next week. We'll go over those and see how things shook out. See you guys then.
See y'all.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend.